Ahmed Menfi, President of the State of Libya. His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. His Excellency Sir Angel Samuel Whipps, President of the Republic of Palau. Her Excellency Her Excellency Maya Sandu, President of the Republic of Moldova. His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez Castellón, President of the Government of the Kingdom of Spain. His Excellency Luis Rodolfo Abinader Corona, President of the Dominican Republic.
told them to stay here.
Okay, let's figure that.
Yeah, some
At
official
least for a
things.
moment.
Yes.
Okay, then let's
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the opening plenary of the Summit on Peace in Ukraine is about to start. The first speaker will be Ms. Viola Amherd, President of the Swiss Confederation. The plenary will be chaired by Mr. Cassis, Head of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. Madam President, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to welcome you here to the Bürgenstock, high above Lake Lucerne. There is a long tradition of seeking ways out of war in peaceful places. The Bürgenstock is that kind of place. Though its beauty is in sharp contrast to the reason for this summit, the mountains serve as a reminder that it takes many steps to achieve ambitious goals. Our goal is to inspire a process towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Of course, we are aware that there is a long path ahead of us. We are under no illusion that we will reach a conclusive understanding at this summit. But we can come closer to reaching such an understanding word by word, proposal by proposal, step by step. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the past 28 months have made it clear that the war in Ukraine has far-reaching repercussions for international order, for those in the areas directly affected by the hostilities, and for the lives of millions of people around the world. We all have an existential interest in ensuring that international relations are based on rules and on respect for international law and human rights. Switzerland is a partner for peace and dialogue. As a neutral country, we look back on a long tradition of solidarity and good offices. The harmonious coexistence of nations isn't just a noble objective. Striving for a just and peaceful international order is a commitment set out in our Constitution. To fulfill this responsibility and honor our tradition, my government accepted President Zelensky's request to host this summit. Our aim is to launch a broadly supported process where voices from all corners of the globe can discuss their ideas and points of view. The fact that you have accepted our invitation and that your nations, as well as international organizations, have sent such high-level delegations proves that this approach was right. Although our objective is ambitious, it is in the interests of everyone here to commit to this ambition. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware that a peace process without Russia is inconceivable. A lasting solution must involve both parties. As an international community, we can help to pave the way. That is why we are here. At the same time, we are aiming to achieve real progress on specific issues. With your support, we have defined 3 issues of global impact that we will discuss in our working groups. These are nuclear safety, food security, and the human dimension of the war. Our most important goals for this weekend are to inspire a process leading to a framework for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace for Ukraine based on international law and the UN Charter. To develop a common understanding on how to take concrete steps towards such a framework. And we want to discuss how and under what conditions Russia can be included in this process. It is essential that so many of us use this summit to express our support for a peaceful process, beyond any armed hostilities. Over the past few months, you have actively and with the utmost commitment helped plan and prepare for this summit. I wish to thank you most sincerely for your help. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, finding a path to peace requires perseverance and will. It requires effort on all sides. We can only achieve the ambitious goal of this summit if we pool our strength and come together, even in areas where our positions differ. Here on the Bürgenstock, we will all be making that first crucial step. It is up to us to make sure it is followed by a second. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. And now I invite the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, to take the floor for his address.
Thank you so much. Madam President, thank you. Thank you for your efforts to organize the summit and bring about a just peace. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the day when the world begins to bring a just peace closer. I thank everyone who has worked for this day, every leader, all the teams and advisors, all the states. 101 states and international organizations are now at the summit, and this is a tremendous success, our success, the common success of all those who believe that a united world, United Nations are stronger than any aggressor. Distinguished leaders and representatives of states and international organizations, everyone who is here today for the sake of a just peace. I'm pleased to welcome everyone to the first Peace Summit, which can be the first step towards a just end to the war of Russia against Ukraine. And when we end it justly and fairly for Ukraine on the basis of international law, then every nation in the world will be able to count on the same justice and fairness, on the same effectiveness of the UN Charter with regard to its rights. And then these words will once again have their full power. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and so important of nations, large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. These are the first words of the UN Charter, but they are also the words that describe the essence of the peace formula, which became the basis of the Peace Summit and encouraged all parts of the world and different nations with equal respect to participate in our joint work. The Peace Summit, our unity here proves that the very idea of international law remains alive and effective. Your presence here proves that the UN Charter and the basic conventions are not a formality, but the real foundations of coexistence among peoples. Our principles are clear. No one had the right to wage a war of aggression against a neighbor and undermine one of the basic principles of the UN Charter, the territorial integrity of states. No one had the right to threaten the world with nuclear weapons. No one had the right to undermine food, energy, or any other security of the world and its regions. No one had the right to kidnap the children of another nation. No one had the right to undermine peace. We are able to ensure the effectiveness of such principles. These are globally important principles. And I am grateful to you, distinguished leaders and representatives of states and international organizations, for proving that the world may not fall into total war anymore. The war Russia unfortunately brought to us, to Ukraine, to our homes, to Ukrainian cities, our villages, and hundreds of them were unfortunately completely burned by the Russian bombs, artillery, and missiles. Putin has taken the lives of thousands of our people. Why? Because he wants to take over a neighboring country. I do not wish this to anyone. I sincerely wish that all of you, all the peoples of the world, every child, every family could simply live without war. And I want this for all Ukrainians. Ukraine had the right to peace, just like all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, we must stop this war based on the UN Charter, respect for international law, the just interests of the Ukrainian people, and the idea of the undeniable value of human life, not war. Now we will focus on 3 points, like Madam President said, on what is useful to everyone in the world, without exception. The first point is radiation and nuclear safety. The second is food security. The third is the release of prisoners and deportees, adults and children, military and civilians whose lives have been broken by war. We will focus on 3 initial points of the peace formula, and in the process of working on them, we can reach an agreement and create an action plan for each point of the formula. Therefore, this inaugural peace summit includes 3 panels where each participating country can show its leadership. The peace formula is inclusive, and we are happy to hear and work on all proposals, all ideas, what is really needed for peace and what is important to you, dear friends. I urge all of you to be as active as possible, and I am proud that all parts of the world, all continents are now represented at the Peace Summit. We have managed to avoid one of the most terrible things, namely the division of the world into opposing blocs. Here, there are representatives from Latin America, Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Asia, the Pacific, North America, and religious leaders. 101 participants, and no one had the privilege of deciding for another. This is true multipolarity, when each political pole of the earth is represented and has its own influence in solving a globally important issue. No one doubts that the global majority wants to guarantee all aspects of security, including nuclear and food security. The majority of the world definitely supports the principle of territorial integrity of states, sovereignty of nations, and equality in relations between peoples. The world majority definitely wants to live without bloody crises, deportations, and ecocides. And so every nation that is not represented now and that shares the same values of the UN Charter, indeed and word, will be able to join our work in the next stages. The peace formula encourages all the powers of the world to think about ending the war and to propose how to end it. And therefore, the very idea of war has already lost. Putin should switch from the language of ultimatums to the language of the world majority, which wants a just peace. Distinguished leaders and representatives of states, what exactly can this summit deliver. First is to prove that the return of security is indeed possible. We will work out the steps with you. Second is to provide a real plan to make every step for peace work, from nuclear and food security to the release of prisoners and deportees, to the complete end of the war without the threat of its new outbreak. I believe it's possible. Third, there is no need to reinvent the wheel when the UN Charter already defines the foundations of peace and normal coexistence of peoples. We just have to return to them. And for this purpose, we need to decide how countries will cooperate, who will be co-leaders, in order to fix and implement an action plan. These are absolutely clear and achievable goals. Now, there is no Russia here. Why? Because if Russia was interested in peace, there would be no war. We must decide together what a just peace means for the world and how it can be achieved in a truly lasting way. The UN Charter is the basis for us. And then, when the action plan is on the table, agreed by all and transparent for the peoples, then it will be communicated to the representatives of Russia. And so that at the second peace summit we can fix the real end of the war. Now we are starting this path together. We must prove that the united world is a world of peace, a world that knows how to act correctly. Thank you for attention. Thank you for participating in the summit. I hope for fruitful work together, of course, together. We all need peace. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I'm pleased to hand over the floor to the Vice President of the United States of America, Kamala Harris.
Thank you. Thank you, President Ahmed and President Zelensky, for hosting this summit. It is my honor to be here with all of the leaders today. I first met President Zelensky in February of 2022, just 5 days before Russia invaded Ukraine. An outrageous attempt to subjugate a free people and an attempt to wipe a sovereign state off the map. On that same day, I addressed the Munich Security Conference and made clear that the United States of America is a steadfast supporter of the principles that people have a right to choose their own form of government. Nations have a right to choose their own alliances. There are inalienable rights governments must protect. The rule of law must be cherished. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states must be respected. And national borders should not be changed by force. And nearly 2.5 years later, I am here to reaffirm the commitment of the United States to these principles and our unwavering commitment to support the people of Ukraine as they defend themselves against Russia's brutal aggression. As I discussed with President Zelensky earlier today, President Biden and I have made clear over the past 3 years, we are committed to uphold international rules and norms, to defend democratic values and stand up to dictators, and to stand with our allies and partners. This approach has provided for our security and prosperity for generations, and it continues to do so today. This approach makes America strong, and it keeps Americans safe. And this approach bolsters global stability. Russia's aggression is not only an attack on the lives and the freedom of the people of Ukraine. It is not only an attack on global food security and energy supplies. Russia's aggression is also an attack on international rules and norms and the principles embodied in the UN Charter. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Nevertheless, for nearly 2.5 years, it has shamelessly violated the core tenets of that charter. If the world fails to respond when an aggressor invades its neighbor, other aggressors will undoubtedly become emboldened. It leads to the potential of a war of conquest and chaos, not order and stability, which threatens all nations. President Joe Biden and I will continue to support Ukraine and continue to impose costs on Russia. And we will continue to work toward a just and lasting peace based on the principles of the United Nations Charter and the will of the people of Ukraine. President Zelensky, the United States shares your vision for the end of this war and an end to the suffering of the Ukrainian people. And let us all then commit to the imperative of returning innocent children kidnapped by Russia, returning them to their homes. Let us also agree a practical benefit of the work of this peace summit is to increase global food and energy security. And let nothing about the end of this war be decided without Ukraine. By contrast, however, yesterday, Putin put forward a proposal. But we must speak truth. He is not calling for negotiations, he is calling for surrender. America stands with Ukraine not out of charity, but because it is in our strategic interest. We stand with delegations from more than 90 nations who also have a strategic interest in a just peace in Ukraine. Among us, no doubt, exists a diverse range of views on many of the global challenges and opportunities we face. We don't always agree. However, regarding Putin's unprovoked, unjustified war against Ukraine, there is unity and solidarity in support of international norms and rules. For President Joe Biden and me, it is one of our defining missions to uphold the international rules-based order, to defend it, strengthen it, and promote it. And no doubt it must be a priority for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. May I now ask the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to give her address.
President Amherd, liebe Viola, President Zelensky, dear Volodymyr, Vice President Harris, dear Kamala, Presidents and Prime Ministers, Ministers, Excellencies. We have all come to Switzerland from different places, with different histories. We may not always see the world in the same way, but there's something all our countries have in common. We all value our independence and our freedom. We all expect our borders to be respected. We all yearn to be the masters of our own destiny. Some, indeed many countries, have had to fight for this, for independence, for self-determination, for freedom. And this is also what Ukraine is fighting for. This is also what the people of Ukraine desire. And their greatest aspiration is to be independent and free in peace. They want the missiles to stop hitting their cities. They want to live free from fear. They want their children to be safe, not constantly worrying about the next air raid siren. Surely this is the right of all countries and all people. And this is why we're here today. We're here today to help bring an end to a brutal and unjust war, a conflict that has shattered lives and displaced millions. The echoes of Russia's war of aggression reverberate across the globe. Energy prices have soared, food prices have exploded, and it is a cautionary tale for the entire world. Is it right that a larger country can invade and take territory from a smaller neighbor? The answer is, of course, no. It is written in the Charter of the United Nations. And that is why it is vital that we reaffirm that charter. It is vital that we pledge again to uphold firmly the principles of the UN Charter. Freezing the conflict today with foreign troops occupying Ukrainian land is not an answer. In fact, it is a recipe for future wars of aggression. Instead, we need to support a comprehensive, just, and sustainable peace for Ukraine. One that restores Ukraine's sovereignty and its territorial integrity, the inviolability of all borders, the sovereignty of all nations. This is at stake. And history teaches us the quest for peace is fraught with challenges. But it was precisely from the ashes of World War II that the United Nations were born. And today we need once again to light that beacon of hope for global peace and security. We, the international community, must stand together to support Ukraine in its pursuit of peace. That is how we open the path to peace. That is how we open the path that will allow lives and homes to be rebuilt. And that is how we open the path to restore international peace and security. Our common task is to reaffirm the primacy of the United Nations Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. As we would like to give the opportunity to speak to everybody during the upcoming sessions, I kindly ask all speakers to limit your interventions to 1 to 3 minutes. I am now pleased to invite the President of Kenya, William Ruto, to give his intervention.
The President of Switzerland, the President Zelensky of Ukraine, Madam Vice President of the United States, heads of states, ladies and gentlemen. 79 years after the international community established a multilateral institutional framework to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a horrifying spectacle of carnage and devastation, which has left 500,000 people dead and 7.1 million people displaced in its wake. Across the world, people and nations are enduring the negative consequences of disrupted supply chains. Kenya's position has been clear and unequivocal from the beginning. Russia's aggression against Ukraine is unlawful, unjust, and a violation of the fundamental principles of international law, which honor the sovereign equality of nations, upholds their territorial integrity, and advocates the peaceful resolution of all disagreements. Just like the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East has been equally devastating. So is the case with the war in the Sahel region in Africa, in Eastern DRC, in Somalia, in the Horn of Africa, and of course in the Sudan. 40 million Africans have been displaced by the war in our continent, and 2.5 million kids are out of school. This state of affairs speaks volumes of global leadership, and especially the peace architecture at the United Nations, and more specifically, the gridlock at the United Nations Security Council. Today, a farmer in Kenya, in rural Kenya actually, knows there is war in Ukraine for two reasons. Number one, he paid more for his fertilizer, and number two, his fertilizer came late. Let me also say, this peace summit is a historic step in the right direction. For the first time, we have convened to talk about peace in Ukraine and not war in Ukraine. Secondly, a commitment to peace makes certain fundamental concessions inevitable. This summit should not be a meeting of just friends. This should be a meeting of both friends and foe. To succeed in this positive trajectory, Russia must be on the table, number one. Number two, an American general, Norman Swartzfeld, said, the more we sweat in peace, the less we bleed in war. It is time for leaders of the world to talk about peace, negotiate peace, work hard to build peace, and configure a global strategic framework that integrates peace as the sole means and end of human endeavor. Finally, we have gathered here and we are reminded by the Indian statesman Mahatma Gandhi, who said that an eye for an eye will make humanity blind. Just as Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unlawful and unacceptable, the unilateral appropriation of Russia's assets is equally unlawful, unacceptable, and a derogation from the UN Charter, especially for those of us who believe in freedom, justice, and democracy, and the rule of law. As we embark on this journey to resolve conflict in Ukraine and throughout the world, it's time for parties to the war in Ukraine to demonstrate good faith, abandon intransigent attitudes, and soften their positions. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I am delighted to hand over the floor to the Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz.
Madam President, dear Viola Amherd, dear Volodymyr Zelensky, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We have come here today to talk about peace. Peace in Ukraine first and foremost, of course, but nothing less than our global security and the rules-based international order are at stake. For Ukraine, defending itself for over 2 years against the Russian aggression is an existential fight to secure its free and democratic future, as Russia denies Ukraine its independence, its territorial integrity, and its very existence as a sovereign nation. This illegal war of aggression has shattered peace and brought imperialism back to the European continent. While this is a war in Europe, it has, as we have witnessed over the last 2 years, far-reaching global consequences. This war has endangered international food and energy security. It has put the threat of a nuclear catastrophe back on our minds. It has weakened global economic growth and highlighted the fate of the most vulnerable, of innocent civilians, unlawfully displaced persons, in particular children and prisoners of war. This all comes to show. This war affects us all. That is why I describe the Russian war of aggression as a Zeitenwende, a watershed moment. But how to end Russia's war against Ukraine and achieve a just and lasting peace? Let me share some reflections with you today. First, no country wants peace more than Ukraine. But let us be honest, peace is more than the absence of war. An immediate ceasefire without serious negotiations, without a roadmap toward a just and lasting peace, merely on the basis of so-called new realities, would only legitimize Russia's illegal land grab. In the end, this would result in yet another frozen conflict, a scenario that is unjust, dangerous, and not sustainable, neither for Ukraine nor Europe or the international community as a whole. Second, Some say that any negotiated peace must take into account Russia's legitimate security concerns. Let us recall that before the invasion, both NATO and the US were ready to enter into a broader discussion on European security that included all relevant countries. The aim was to promote transparency and stability and to build trust in order to reduce the likelihood of future conflict. As we all know, it was Russia that chose war over diplomacy and dialogue. So let me be very clear, whatever the perception of one's own security concerns may be, these concerns must not and cannot justify an invasion of a peaceful neighboring country. Third, I would like to highlight that it is Ukraine, the victim of unprovoked aggression, that has had the courage to present to the world a peace plan. Inspired by President Zelensky's peace formula, many, if not all, of the countries represented here today have participated in the Copenhagen, Jeddah, Valletta and Davos meetings of national security advisors. And so we are here today. I'm very grateful to our Swiss hosts that we can enter into a truly global exchange on principles for a just, lasting and comprehensive peace and on how to achieve the widest possible international support for a future peace process in Ukraine. Which document is better suited to guide us than the Charter of the United Nations with its fundamental principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty? This also includes the respect for international humanitarian law and human rights. It includes the sovereign equality of all states, the peaceful resolution of conflicts, and multilateral cooperation for the benefit of humanity. These principles are binding for us all, and they are the foundation of the international rules-based order. My last point today is on Russia. It is true, peace in Ukraine cannot be achieved without involving Russia. But let us not forget that, as we speak, Russia continues to relentlessly wage its brutal war. We all know Russia could end this war today or at any given moment once it ceases its onslaught and withdraws troops from Ukraine. To date, Russia has refused to heed our collective call for peace on the basis of international law and the UN Charter. Our gathering today is important, and I want to thank all of you for your participation. We all recognize that achieving peace still requires tremendous efforts. We should jointly seek to achieve a framework and a roadmap for concrete steps in this direction. I have compared this process to a small plant that needs watering, nurturing, and delicate care. Let us engage collectively in ensuring that this plant develops and grows. Let us use the time until our next meeting to intensify our efforts. I look forward to your and to our discussions.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. I am now pleased to invite Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed Al Thani from Qatar to share his thoughts.
Madam President Viola Amr, Mr. President Zelensky, Excellencies, I would like to begin by extending my appreciation to the Federal Republic of Switzerland for hosting this summit towards seeking peaceful solution to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Amidst an international climate of conflict, the importance of continuing to call for a ceasefire and striving to find a peaceful solution is clear now more than ever. In this context, I renew the State of Qatar's call on all parties to comply with Charter of United Nations and international law, respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, to uphold our collective commitment to settle international disputes by peaceful means, and to refrain from threatening to or resorting to the use of force. Ladies and gentlemen, the State of Qatar has strived to keep channels of communication open in order to work on addressing the humanitarian repercussions of this conflict. With this in mind, and at the request of our Ukrainian friends, Qatar hosted talks in Doha with the participation of both Ukrainian and Russian delegations in order to discuss the reunification of Ukrainian children with their families in Ukraine. These efforts have been welcomed by Russia and have so far resulted in reunification of 34 children with their families, and our efforts continue to reunite many more. Under our Health and Recovery Program, we have hosted these families in Doha to provide a comprehensive care for them and their children. Esteemed guests, since the beginning of this conflict, the State of Qatar has strived to support international efforts to address the worsening humanitarian repercussions and protect civilians through multiple pledges to support health, education, and food security initiatives launched by Ukraine. Internationally, we played a key role in alleviating the global energy crisis arising from this conflict, working to maintain supply, quantities, and price stability in global markets by rapidly increasing our LNG exports to European countries. Excellencies, amidst this global context of conflict and disasters, international cooperation is vital now more than ever. I look forward to the discussions that will result from this summit in the coming days and to exploring suitable mechanisms that will ensure the participation of all parties in a constructive dialogue towards achieving a peaceful solution in accordance with international law and Charter of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you also for being on time. May I hand over to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud.
Your Excellencies, I would like to thank the Swiss Confederation for inviting us to attend this summit, in line with its long tradition as mediators and peacemakers. The Kingdom's participation in this summit stems from our commitment to support all efforts at reaching an end to this conflict and achieving sustainable and just peace and security. We hope this summit provides the much-needed basis for placing us on a political track to resolving the conflict. Since this conflict erupted, the Kingdom has asserted the centrality of international law, the importance of peacefully resolving differences through dialogue, and the need to reduce tensions and mitigate the global impacts of the war. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister also extended the Kingdom's good offices to both sides, expressing our readiness to mediate and bring the conflict closer to a solution. These efforts have positively contributed to the exchange of hundreds of prisoners, including multiple foreign nationals. The disruption to peace and security in Europe has affected global stability and hindered collective action and global cooperation. We reaffirm the importance of facilitating access to global food supplies and working to strengthen both global food and energy security in the face of the challenges the world faces. More than 2 years into this conflict, the impact is felt by the international community, and it is therefore a shared burden to encourage peace and negotiation rather than further escalation. The Kingdom views as a priority the need to facilitate a cessation of hostilities and to encourage an environment conducive to peace, one that spares further destruction and the loss of life. This overreaching consideration has been reflected in our balanced position from the beginning of the conflict, while leveraging our positive relations and good offices with both sides in search of a pathway to peace. We have also sought to provide Ukraine critical humanitarian assistance to alleviate the suffering of the Ukrainian people. These principles reflect the Kingdom's long-standing position, and we will continue to lend our support to all efforts to facilitate dialogue between both parties. We believe it is important that the international community encourage any step towards serious negotiations, which will require difficult compromise as part of a roadmap that leads to peace. And here it is essential to emphasize that any credible process will need Russia's participation. We hope the outcomes of this summit reflect those aims. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. It is my pleasure to ask the Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida, to give his address.
はい、まず、スイスの素晴らしいホスピタリティと、そしてサミット開催に向けたご尽力に、心から謝意を表します。日本は、2年以上前にロシアが侵略を開始した直後から、今日のウクライナは明日の東アジアかもしれない、こうした考え方のもと、厳しい対ロ制裁と強力なウクライナ支援を実施してきました。また、一昨日には、ウクライナをさらに支えていくべく、私とゼレンスキー大統領との間で二国間文書に署名をいたしました。また、昨年5月、私が議長を務めた G7 広島サミットにおいて、ゼレンスキー大統領や招待国の首脳も交えて議論を行い、主権、領土の一体性の尊重といった国連憲章の原則を守ることをはじめとする4つの原則を確認いたしました。この広島での議論が基盤となり、本日、ウクライナに平和をもたらすべく、約100の国と国際機関の代表がここに集まったことを喜ばしく思います。本日、我々は一つの共通の思いのもとにここに集まりました。それは、ウクライナに一日も早く平和をもたらしたいと望んでいるということです。そして、その平和は国連憲章を含む国際法の諸原則に基づく公正かつ永続的な平和でなくてはならず、力や威圧による一方的な現状変更の試みを正当化するようなものであってはなりません。このような公正かつ永続的な平和をウクライナで実現することは、国際社会全体を分断、対立ではなく、協調の世界に導いていくために象徴的に重要なことです。ここに集う我々が率先してリーダーシップを発揮しようではありませんか。国際社会が一致して取り組むに際しては、我々の命や生活に直接的影響を与える喫緊の問題への対応も急務です。日本は今回のサミットのテーマの一つである原子力安全につき、共同議長として議論に積極的に貢献してきています。また、人道問題も重要です。日本はウクライナの人々が安心して日々の生活を取り戻せるよう、電力分野や地雷除去分野での取り組みを強化していきます。そして来年、地雷除去に関する国際会議を日本で開催する予定であり、日本ならではの形で貢献していきます。日本はウクライナの美しい大地に平和を取り戻すべく、国際社会と緊密に協力し、引き続き取り組みを継続してまいります。Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And now I'm delighted to pass on the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, President Amherd, President Zelensky. Colleagues, Russia chose to wage war on Ukraine. We come here united because we choose peace. Peace based on the foundational principles of the United Nations Charter. The Ukrainian people did not ask for this fight, but in defending their country, their valor and their sacrifice have been truly humbling to witness. It is a cruel paradox that the things that make life worth living are also the things for which brave men and women are prepared to die. For family, for freedom, for the ability to shape one's own future. We salute them all, just as we abhor all of those who have pushed this fate upon them. I recall my first visit to Kyiv when I saw the explosive devices that departing Russian soldiers had placed in children's toys and footballs. There can be no justification for that. There can be no justification for escalating nuclear rhetoric. There can be no justification for disrupting food supplies to tens of millions of vulnerable people. Now, there will be, of course, a diversity of views around this table, but I commend and thank everyone for their participation here today, demonstrating that you all seek a genuine peace to this conflict. Because Putin has no interest in a genuine peace. He's launched a sustained diplomatic campaign against this very summit, ordering countries to stay away. And we should ask, why does Russia feel that they are so threatened by a summit discussing the basic principles of territorial integrity, food security, and nuclear safety? Instead, Russia's representative at the United Nations recently said, the only topic for any international meetings on Ukraine will be the unconditional surrender of the Kyiv regime. Well, that will never happen, because aggression cannot and will not prevail. Instead, we must set out the principles for a just and lasting peace based on international law and the UN Charter. That is the path to a permanent cessation of hostilities, showing that we will always protect the right of all nations to determine their own future. And this summit is the chance to start down that path, to respond together to the global impacts of the war in Ukraine, to send a strong message from the international community to Russia and beyond that we want to end the suffering. We want to see an end to this war, and we want to make this the day that the path towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine became that much closer. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm honored to now pass the floor to the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste, Mr. Shah Mama Gush Mahu.
Excellencies, thank you for giving Timor-Leste the opportunity to share our perspective. I would like to thank Her Excellency Viola Amherd, President of the Swiss Confederation, for inviting me to this Peace Summit. I will keep my intervention brief, focusing on a message that I humbly ask you to bear in mind as we discuss the pathways forward to bring peace to Ukraine and its people. Timor-Leste profoundly understands the suffering faced by the Ukrainian people as a result of the ongoing conflict. We also experienced the invasion and occupation, and our people still carry the haunting memories of the war, which still remain all too vivid for us. From our experience, we learned that we could not put an end to a war which was being supported by Western nations, the same countries that used to speak of the importance of international law and the rules-based order. What kept us determined to continue to fight and die was the hope that after the war, we would live in a new world order that was being promoted at the time. But unfortunately, after 24 years of war and now being independent, what we see is a world of disorder with even more conflict than before. Excellencies, international law is the foundation of global peace and order. However, it must be applied uniformly to every nation, and all states must abide by it. Today, we continue to see the selective application of international law. We see some nations oppose occupation in one country, but not in another. Too often, the very nations that proclaim the sanctity of international law are the ones that violate it. If we are committed to maintaining international peace and security, we must apply international law consistently, without selective enforcement, and treat all conflicts with equal importance. We have a moral obligation to address and be concerned about all conflicts equally. Currently, around 65 wars continue worldwide. Even if they seem distant from our own countries, we must not forget them. We must hold on to international law's promise of justice and reach for peace. Excellencies, I will conclude my message by once again appealing to you to remember these points as we move forward in our discussions and, more importantly, after we return to our respective countries. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, primer ministro. Quiero invitar al presidente de Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, a tomar la palabra. Excelencias, hoy les dirijo la palabra en un momento clave en nuestra búsqueda por la paz y la justicia. Estamos aquí con una visión común, buscar una paz duradera para Ucrania, basada en los principios del derecho internacional y la Carta de los Derechos de las Naciones Unidas. Está claro que la agresión de Rusia contra Ucrania es una infracción clarísima del derecho internacional, un acto injusto que ha generado muchos desastres, tanto en Ucrania como en otros países africanos. Por ejemplo, Ghana es uno de los 28 países africanos que se ha unido a la mayoría global en la Asamblea de las Naciones Unidas a la hora de condenar este acto de agresión. Lo hemos hecho por principios. Esto se debe a nuestra oposición histórica a la hegemonía de los grandes poderes y al dominio de los estados pequeños, lo cual ha hecho que sigamos con nuestra lucha contra el colonialismo, el apartheid. Los efectos del conflicto entre Rusia e Ucrania han llegado muy lejos, han tenido impacto en el mercado global, en los mercados y han exacerbado las crisis económicas para millones de personas. El continente africano se ha visto muy afectado y nuestras economías, que ya son vulnerables y les cuesta recuperarse del impacto de la pandemia del COVID-19, se han visto atadas a mayor sufrimiento. El bloqueo del Mar Negro nos ha llevado a precios de la comida elevadísimos y se han precipitado crisis alimentaria por todo África. Hay muchos países que dependen y mucho de estos insumos para dar de comer a su población. El coste de la vida y la malnutrición es una amenaza muy real para muchas poblaciones. Ante este sufrimiento tan extendido, debemos unirnos y buscar un camino hacia la paz. Esta cumbre es un camino para crear un diálogo y para poder lidiar con las complejidades de este conflicto y trabajar todos juntos en pos de una solución. En este contexto, estamos en un marco fundamental que nos lleve a la paz. Esta fórmula recalca distintos elementos clave que son básicos para una resolución sostenible: el cese inmediato de hostilidades, la retirada de las tropas rusas y la restauración de la integridad territorial de Ucrania. Hace falta también mantener los derechos humanos y facilitar la ayuda humanitaria a aquellos afectados por el conflicto. Debemos adherirnos a los principios de la Carta de Ucrania y así podemos asegurarnos de que cualquier acuerdo de paz sea equitativo y duradero. Y también es un imperativo que cualquier resolución respete la soberanía de Ucrania y la integridad territorial y lidie también con la necesidad de llegar a un consenso por todas las partes involucradas. Con este planteamiento podremos prevenir futuros problemas y mantener una paz duradera en la región. La fórmula de paz de Ucrania es una hoja de ruta viable y todos juntos podemos trabajar en pos de un futuro en el que todos los países coexistan en armonía y seguridad. Por este motivo, Ghana pide que la ausencia de la Federación Rusa y de la República de China en esta reunión no vuelvan a pasar. Esta reunión es un testamento de cómo buscamos la paz y la seguridad en el futuro y estoy seguro de que a través de nuestros esfuerzos conjuntos, independientemente de lo largo y duro que sea el viaje, conseguiremos tener éxito. Gracias por su atención. Señor presidente, muchas gracias. Le paso la palabra al presidente de España, Pedro Sánchez. Quiero empezar agradeciendo a Suiza que sea la anfitriona de esta cumbre por la paz en Ucrania. Han pasado más de 2 años desde que se inició la agresión militar por parte de Rusia, una infracción evidente del derecho internacional y los principios de la Carta de la ONU, inclusive los de soberanía, independencia e integridad territorial. Quiero honrar el heroísmo y la resiliencia del pueblo de Ucrania y su gobierno en la defensa de su país. España seguirá dando apoyo a Ucrania todo el tiempo necesario, porque hay algo claro en este conflicto. Hay un agresor, que es Putin, y hay una víctima, que es el pueblo de Ucrania. En todos los conflictos debemos defender a la víctima y parar al agresor. Hoy lidiamos con algunas de las consecuencias mundiales de este conflicto. Una terrible crisis humanitaria ha empeorado una crisis alimentaria mundial que ya teníamos, que perjudica sobre todo a los más débiles, y el miedo de la catástrofe nuclear que pensamos que nunca volveríamos a ver. España ha trabajado activamente con políticas y recursos para intentar mitigarlos. Pero hay otra consecuencia importante de esta guerra, que es el impacto en el orden internacional. Puede ser una tentación echar la culpa a otros, como a Occidente, a la OTAN, de echarles la culpa de esta guerra. Rusia podría alegar que tiene una preocupación respecto a la seguridad de la situación de Europa y que sus preocupaciones son legítimas. No obstante, se deben aplicar normas básicas en cualquier caso para mantener una coexistencia pacífica entre naciones. Hay normas muy sencillas, como por ejemplo, un país no puede invadir a su vecino, no puede anexionar el territorio de otro país a la fuerza. El alimento no es un arma y las amenazas nucleares son inaceptables. Si no actuamos de acuerdo a estas normas y no las defendemos contundentemente, no hay orden internacional. El caos arrastraría nuestro mundo a la ley de aquel que sea más fuerte. Y simplemente esto no es aceptable. Hoy, en esta reunión tan importante, debemos lanzar un mensaje inequívoco que nos unen unos valores troncales, como lo son el respeto a la soberanía de todos y cada uno de los países, su independencia y su integridad territorial, que el derecho internacional y el derecho humanitario internacional son de aplicación siempre y se deben respetar siempre. Son principios universales que debemos defender de forma contundente, con coherencia y constancia, en todos los lugares, en cualquier momento, independientemente de quién esté involucrado. Los principios son principios y, por tanto, no son negociables. Debemos sentar los mimbres de una paz equitativa y duradera en Ucrania, una solución que valide una agresión o una anexión por la fuerza no durará, solo llevará a un mundo más inestable y peligroso. Esperamos que esta reunión ayude a generar ese consenso para eventualmente llegar a una solución en un futuro con todas las partes involucradas, incluida Rusia. Ha llegado la hora de proporcionar una paz justa y duradera que merecen Ucrania y el mundo. Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. As next speaker, may I call the Prime Minister of Croatia, Andrej Plenković.
Thank you very much, Madam President of the Swiss Confederation, Mr. President of Ukraine. First of all, thank you for having organized this global summit on peace in Ukraine. widely attended and well planned. Russia's invasion of Ukraine actually is not only 2 years and 4 months long, it's a 10-year invasion and aggression of a neighboring country that has proved that the international law is not respected, that the global governance has been left without an answer to this conflict. It has caused disruption.